Security was tight outside the U.S. consulate in the Chinese city of Chengdu as staff inside prepared to leave while U.S. officials took over the closed Chinese consulate in Houston. U.S.-China tensions have soared on a range of fronts, including trade, China's handling of the coronavirus, and a new security law for Hong Kong.
Staff prepared to leave the U.S. consulate in the Chinese city of Chengdu on Saturday, a day after China ordered it to close in response to the U.S. telling China to close its consulate in Houston, Texas. Tit-for-tat consulate closures have sharply escalated tensions between the two powers. A consulate emblem inside the compound in Chengdu, southwestern China, was removed as staff could be seen pushing trolleys. Several consulate vehicles came and went. Police, including many plainclothes officers, gathered outside and closed off the street to traffic. At the Chinese Houston consulate, staff packed up belongings watched by jeering anti-communist protesters. The Trump administration had given China until 4 p.m. on Friday to vacate its consulate in the Texan city. Shortly after the closure order took effect, a group of men who appeared to be U.S. officials were seen by Reuters forcing open a back door to the building, using power tools and a crowbar. Two uniformed members of the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security then arrived to guard the door. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said this week the consulate had been a hub of spying and intellectual property theft. The U.S. consulate in Chengdu was given 72 hours to close, or until 10 a.m. on Monday, the editor of China's Global Times tabloid said on Twitter. Neither the Chengdu consulate nor the U.S. embassy in Beijing have responded to Reuters' requests for comment.
Professor David Kiwuwa is an associate professor in the School of International Studies at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. He joins us now via Skype from London. Mr. Wu, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
Good evening and thanks for having me.
Does this have to do with, the U.S. foreign policy, or is it simply, as a result of the upcoming elections in November?
I think it could be both, because in any shape or form, the very issue of intellectual property and espionage did not start with Donald Trump, or did not start in this administration or during this electoral cycle in itself. I think it goes much further, where the United States has increasingly seen China as an emerging competitor on the international stage, and therefore one of the issues that the United States has wanted to do is to confront China, and perhaps to what the Chinese say is to contain China's rise. And so in that way, you could say it is partially, framed within the broader American foreign policy. But on the other hand, the very exponential rise in temperature about this particular issue is also very much rather about the coming elections, because as you have seen, that Donald Trump was very much, saying during the last elections that he wants to be tough on China. Now, of course, in the last couple of years, he was not seen to be so much as tough on China, but rather, as from his own words, he was getting along great with China. And I think the failure, or the perceived failure of his management of the COVID crisis itself, that has been blamed for, originating from China, has meant that he had to ratchet up the rhetoric against China. And that perhaps is going back to the perennial accusations of espionage and intellectual property.
I mean, you touched on the fact that the United States is trying to, curb the rise of China. I guess the fundamental question to ask then is, how did you get here? What is the source of these tensions? Because at some point, China and the US and the United States were the biggest trading partners, with trade totaling in the region of about 660 billion US dollars. So what could have been the source of the tension?
Again, I think it's a good question in a sense that it frames the crisis, the current crisis, within a broader pond. And here, what we are looking at is that since the 2000s, we have seen China significantly becoming an important and strong global player, both in political terms, diplomatic terms, and also economically. So what we have seen is that the United States has looked over its shoulder, much more anxious, perhaps, about the growing assertiveness of China on the international stage, within the economic domain, and perhaps it is also perceived that China was beginning to encroach onto the United States' traditional areas of influence, specifically in Asia. And therefore, the perception that now China is beginning to compete with the United States for dominance in a way has made both parties, both the Republican and the Democrats, to be very wary of a rising China. And of course, in reaction, China has always professed that it is a peaceful rising China, which wants to do its part in global governance. But of course, the United States see this as more of a threat rather than a cooperative, rising, peaceful China.
Now, David, how much of this is a function of President Trump's and even President Xi Jinping's decision?
Well, I think it's not so much, tied to the two parties, that is to President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump and themselves. As we pointed out earlier, that the tensions began way before President Xi Jinping's presidency or Donald Trump came to power. But the ratcheting up or the deterioration of the relationship in the last couple of months, literally, is very much about that. Donald Trump is desperate to be seen to be getting tougher and tougher on China, because one of his attack lines against his presumed challenger, that is in Vice President Biden, is that President Biden is weak on China. So how do you then buff up your credentials as being very tough and strong on China? Is by ratcheting up the tension itself. And of course, we know Donald Trump, that he does revel in this adversarial approach, hoping that he will get some compromises. And he did that fair and square when he did get a lot of compromises during the trade disputes that just culminated into the signing of the first phase of the trade agreement.
Now, Beijing has over the years been building its coalition of like-minded countries. So is this likely to sort of counterbalance any pressure that Washington may attempt to bring to bear?
Again, a very interesting insight that what has China done in response, and what we have seen, especially for us who live in China in particular and are China watchers, is that China's rhetoric has been much creating a ring of friends, creating almost a coalition of friends. And that it has done very, very systematically in Asia, in trying to, let's say, almost rip off, not necessarily rip, but rather cream off friends of Washington towards the Chinese orbit. And therefore, it is thinking, and that's the same thing it has done in Africa, where it has strengthened its diplomatic hand, it has strengthened its economic hand in Africa. In Latin America, it is increasing its economic footprint, its diplomatic footprint. So we can see, and including Central Asia. So yes, we can see that China is not sitting back. It is moving forward in trying to reassert its newfound position as a great power actor. It is reasserting its position as a responsible leader, global leader. And in doing so, it is also thinking of creating a coalition of friends within which it can harness its own international agenda.
And how worried should we be? I mean, what are the implications that these impasse or the US-China tensions will implicate, or rather will influence the global geopolitical space?
I think in retrospect, what we see is that on one hand, we can be worried. that the great powers are losing focus on what's really important, that the great powers are losing focus on fighting poverty, or they're losing coherency in tackling climate change. So there is an element of worry that, yes, these kind of continuing great power tensions will force these great powers to take their eyes off the ball of the things that really are important. But on the other hand, we may gain some kind of, we may feel a lot much more heartened by thinking that perhaps this is more of a temporary situation, that ultimately this wave will come to pass, and that there will be an attempt to reset the relationship once the elections are ended, and that both parties will begin to have a rapprochement towards their own shared common interests. And because it's in their own interest to work together, because of their very intertwined economies and how these contribute to the health of the global economy.
Well, the issue of security and security competition is not new in the whole discussion around U.S.-China, tensions or the U.S.-China ties. So is this perhaps related to technology? Is this related to the allegations of spying and the Huawei issue, as it were?
I think the story about, of course, national security has been an ongoing story, again, for as long as there has been, in more contemporary times, U.S.-China relations. And specifically, the United States has been very concerned about the Chinese effort to infiltrate the U.S. Political system, economic structures, science and research, and therefore they have seen China as an existential threat for national security. And in that respect, they have zeroed on in the issue of intellectual property. And of course, in a way, they're saying that because China is desperate to become a dominant world leader in the areas of technology, in the areas of science, in the areas of new technologies, that in fact it would stop at nothing to gain its hand on an advantage that puts it on top of this competition. And in that respect, the United States is very, very anxious. And that is why, in a way, in looking at Huawei and in looking at various cases of technology, IP patents and technology theft, the U.S. is emphasizing one core issue, that its national security is at stake, its economic security is at stake, because China is intent on not only infiltrating the system in order to gain knowledge about U.S. science, U.S. technology, in order for it to be able to infiltrate and see the weak points and the strong points of the United States for it to act. And so Huawei is within this particular context seen as a threat to national security. And the United States has been able to convince some of its allies that, in fact, Huawei and many other companies, including students, we shall come to that, I think, have been agents of disruption for the Chinese government.
Of course, the issue of coronavirus always comes to the fore. In the past, President Trump has referred to the virus as a Chinese virus. Is he perhaps blaming China for its handling of the virus, or is it simply, turning a blind eye to his own handling of the virus, with the United States being the epicenter?
Well, I mean, the issue of China virus, I think, would be, a lot of people kind of mirror that to the Spanish virus. That is there a problem calling the Spanish virus, as in the same way as their problem calling it the China virus. But in the way that Donald Trump uses the China virus has more of a sneaky intention of almost a racist, xenophobic kind of, branding of China. But also specifically, the broader message here, or messaging, is that China sent us this virus. Now, of course, on one hand, Donald Trump has performed absolutely terribly on managing the crisis in the United States. But at the same time, he has himself said that he's not to blame for the virus or for the handling of the problem, because China did not give the United States a lot of information beforehand, or did not necessarily take important steps to stop the spread of the virus. So on one hand, Donald Trump is trying to cast this China virus, as he calls it, in more racist context, to demonize China, to cast China as one that has created a pandemic for the world. But at the same time, he's trying to say that, look, my failings are not just because they're my failing, but because China, in fact, precipitated this failing by not giving us the right information, by also perhaps not stopping the virus at source, as Donald Trump himself has said.
Now, before I let you go, David, the U.S. presidential contender Joe Biden's position on China and his stance on U.S. foreign policy is well documented. So what if he wins the elections in November? What's likely to happen?
An interesting question, in the sense that both parties, we will agree, have all ratcheted up the anti-China rhetoric. All of them are very much about saying who is going to be tough on China, who is going to be tough on China. Some people, to some observers, they're thinking that it's almost a race to the bottom. But make no mistake that both parties, way before Donald Trump came to power, are very much about trying to be tough on China within the broader context of the China containment policy. Now, if Biden wins the presidency, we are seeing a number of things. Biden may remain or may still pursue the tough on China approach, but the question is, how does he pursue it? So they will both continue to pursue a tough on China policy, but Biden needs China in a way to address issues of Hong Kong, to address issues of the human rights in Xinjiang, to address issues of climate change or COVID-19 or the North Korean nuclear proliferation issue. Biden needs China in trying to pursue a trade balancing and, of course, to continue a conversation on intellectual property rights. So I think a Biden presidency will be very much about trying to draw compromises with China. He will remain tough on China, but he'll also understand that China can be brought on board as somebody who they could work with for common interests. So in any way or shape or form, also, Biden will pursue what he would call building alliances, where he will go and reestablish the alliances that Donald Trump has broken up. He will create a ring of friends that he uses as a spearhead to confront China. He will rebuild institutions and structures that are used on the global stage to confront China, or to dismantle the China narrative, or to dismantle and push back the China's assertion of its dominance on the global stage. So Biden will use a two-pronged approach, one of building alliances with friends and confront China, but on the other also, and including institutions, but also in pursuing a more cooperative rather than a much more confrontation adversarial approach with China in order to gain some kind of progress on the issues that I've just pointed out.
Professor Kiwuwa, great insights there. Thank you so much for sharing them with us this hour. We appreciate your time.
And thank you for having me. Thank you once again.
That is Professor David Kiwuwa, an Associate Professor in the School of International Studies, University of Nottingham in Ningbo, China.